Good evening, and broadcasting again from the computer center that we have here. I wanted to discuss again a little bit about the shifting paradigms in society and culture. They're so often overlooked, and we sometimes tend to live in the past or see things in the vision of how people thought in the past, and still do perhaps in Eastern Europe a bit too much, I think. Paradigm shifts, not only that, in its simple terms, but the actual evolution in the human brain that's taken place. We've discussed it a bit before, but we need to look at it from time to time, try to bring ourselves up to date. Whilst I was in New York at medical consultation, I also met with two scientists from Russia, colleagues of mine in the Global Futures Forum. We were discussing some of the changes and transformations that are taking place. The guided evolution that's beginning to take place through genetic engineering and eventually through the Avatar program. Some things that sound like science fiction. Yesterday's science fiction is almost always today's reality. I see Samsung is now challenging the Apple computer system for the iPhone, producing something similar, but the entire screen is controlled only by the eyes, by eye movement. You know, of course, that I'm sure most of you know that both the United States and Russia have weapons that are guided entirely by the eyes of the operator. Wherever they fix their eyes, this is where the explosive goes, the shell, rocket, whatever, goes and will explode. But it aims where the person is guiding it is looking, and can be manipulated in these ways. We know that some of our robotics already can be manipulated, driven by only our brain waves, by reading the thought patterns in our brain. And these things appeared in science fiction decades ago. Today, of course, they're realities. Science fiction writers tend to be a bit prophetic, always have been. The shifting paradigms in the way the human brain works, the way people, particularly those born since the 90s, there's been a considerable shift in the actual thinking and reasoning processes that people follow. Somehow we need to keep abreast of those in the faith, in missionary outreach. We have to speak in a different language in different ways to younger generations. I had some correspondence from Greece not long ago from friends. The children don't particularly want to go to church anymore. They don't see, first of all, they don't see the point, because churches are a little bit dark. The priest closes himself off behind a wall and says things in a language that nobody understands, and the chanter chants in a language that nobody understands. They read the Apostle and Gospel very often in a language that nobody understands, and they can't get any real answers to the serious questions that they put before them. Years ago, when I was having Meleti for young people in Thessaloniki, I was amazed at the sophisticated and really intelligent questions that young people there were asking. I get similar questions from the ones who are interested here in North America. And this has always troubled me, that so many questions are asked for which young people have not been able to find any concrete answers elsewhere. And so much of the teaching that we do it actually boils down to some kind of hatred and fear. I know that His All Holiness, as the Ecumenical Patriarch, has reached out to other religious bodies, other religious groups. Sometime now in our modern era, we're getting past this idea that we should not talk to people of other religious bodies and groups. Oriental Orthodox people, Coptic people, are people of completely different Christian denominations, but also with people of other religions altogether. And I think we have to follow the leadership of His All Holiness and open ourselves more and more to discussions and talks, to friendly relations with all other peoples. This is something that the younger generation can understand better. We teach the Orthodox faith in a rather concrete way, and people understand that this is the authentic Christian message. But part of that message is also opening our hearts to the other. In the story of Jonah, for example, well, we know that the story is not completely true, because we know that Nineveh never accepted the God of the Jews and never repented in sackcloth and ashes. But what's the story really telling us? Is that the Jews had become so particularist that they weren't actually reaching out and preaching the one true God to other nations, because this is only for us. We hold on to this as just for us. Some people would come in through marriage or other ways into the holy nation. And then God tells Jonah something astonishing. Go to the most hated people on the face of the earth. And believe anybody, the people of Nineveh, the Assyrians, were cruel, brutal, savage. They were the most hated people on the face of the earth. And God says, Jonah, go to the most hated people on the face of the earth and tell them that I love them. I desire that they should repent and come in to inherit the promises of Israel also. Go to the most hated people on the face of the earth and let them know that I love them. This is God's command. And even though Jonah tries to flee from it, God makes sure that he, in the story anyway, does go. And you see that sometimes the bitterness of Jonah at the walls, when he has the shade, the vine growing over the shade, and the cankerworms come and devour it, and he's left again in the sun. But the message really is, particularism isn't what I told you to do. What I told you to do was to express the gospel, not only with words, but in deeds and actions. Go to the most hated people on earth and tell them that God loves them and invites them in to receive the promises of Israel also. This is what we're called to do with other religious bodies as well. Go and tell them God loves them. And through actions, through love, through compassion, through having our ears open to them as well as our hearts, to have discourse and discussion, not arguments and debates, to try to bring them in and show the gospel to them. But the shifting and changing paradigms around us, the shifting and changing, not simply paradigms, but the way people think, the way younger generation actually think. And our older generation get absolutely hysterical over things that are of no consequence whatsoever to the present generations who are entering into the world's leadership and governments and shaping them. We trip ourselves up on some of our moralisms, on some of the things that really bother us a great deal. But we don't realize that the younger generation don't even think about them that way at all. That they're not really bothered about these things at all. So you find a few, but In general, not very many. We're in a technological age where the attention span isn't so great as it once was, where we can't overburden people with too much heaviness. We can't convince people. Younger generation, we can always find some, but in general, it's very difficult to convince the younger generation that they should have the kind of hate and fear that our parents and grandparents, and even us, have had. We worry and concern ourselves about things that are of no consequence anymore, except to older generations. We have to really pay attention to the fact that the human brain is evolving. It's actually changing, and it's changing under the pressures of technologies. What concerns a great number of younger people, will there be any surface of the earth for them to stand upon in a few decades? Will the environment be totally destroyed? Will we create such global warming that we have horrendous storms that kill masses of people? Now, the further north we live, in Canada, we notice climate change far more than people who live further south, because it really affects our Arctic. It affects our croplands. And here on the Pacific coast, the increase in storms, the increase in flooding, the loss of glaciers that we can watch happening in the mountains round about us, all these things alert us that the environment, stress on the environment and the pressure on the environment is far from over, and that a great deal of more work has to be done upon it. But when we begin to discuss morality with the younger generation, why is it that everybody in the older set always begins to talk about sex? That isn't the issue. That isn't the main problem. Younger generations, even of very, very pious evangelical Protestants, who are very religious about these things, the younger generation, and I've heard this when I've been asked to speak to these groups, a young woman from a very pious family, teenage girl, when we had questions after I'd given a talk, asked, I don't really see what's wrong with having sexual relations before you're married. Well, she didn't, and a lot of younger people don't. So how do you start to talk to people who say, oh, that makes God mad, or God thinks that's evil and sinful and naughty, you'll go to hell if you do that? It doesn't work. If we start to talk about morality, we need to start by talking about the ecosystem, our biosphere, the life support system of all living things. Because the sin against this earth, this atmosphere, this water that God created and gave to us, the sin against that is the greatest immorality of all. Because it hurts not one or two people. It hurts all of humanity and every living thing on the surface of the earth. Talk about the destruction, pain, the end of life. It's life negating what we're doing to the atmosphere, to the biosphere around us. And orthodoxy is life affirming. That's why we oppose abortion so much, because orthodoxy is life affirming, not life negating. So we want to look at these shifting paradigms in the way people think. We talk about every moral issue, but we can't talk about it in the old terms of naughty, nice, right, wrong. We have to talk about it and give reasons, concrete reasons, not mythologies. We have so many mythologies about all these things that we end up being laughed at by the younger generation far more than we're listening to. And as long as we're teaching some kind of mythologies or making up stories or saying what some old woman in some unknown city at some unknown time had a dream and saw such and such. We need really to be cognizant of this dramatic shift in the way the minds of younger people work, how they think, what their real questions are, and not give answers that we cook up, like some kind of almost sly sophisms that we make up to try to answer a question for which we do not have the answer. I think I mentioned one time before, I visited a parish and certainly gave a talk, something I'm now forbidden to do, of course. But one table of upper-level high school students, some university students, were sitting all together. And when I talked to them, some of them knew that I had a background in physics, so they wanted to talk about cosmic string theory. So we spent close to an hour talking about it, pros and cons, and why, in my view, it probably isn't true. But anyway, these questions come up constantly, and we can't ignore them or say that, well, they're unimportant. They are important. The final discovery of Higgs boson, which is, I'm sure all of you know, it was called the God particle since the 60s. And it's very significant. And it actually has an impact on the way we view the entire universe. And students in secondary school, university, they discuss these things, they hear about it. It's important in some of the classwork that comes up. It changes so much of the way people think and how they understand things when a great discovery, a breakthrough like this comes along. And for me, the Higgs field really is an indication that God had shaped and formed and set everything in good order in the universe. Because the Higgs field is the source of the mass for every particle that exists, and therefore directly connected with the origins of matter. So we see this in different lights. Some people will see it as challenging the gospel. Others will see it as indifferent. Some of us will see it as certifying in our own minds and hearts that God had placed everything in good order in the universe when He created it. Other people will be terrified of these things, or frightened anyway. Some will come out with denials, other things. But we really need to be aware and alert about these new developments in the very mentalities of people, in the things their minds pursue and shape. Before I was forbidden to give talks to young people, to anybody in fact, we discussed a lot of this at length, and of course I made notes over the last 30 years about these things, and really taken notes of what young people are asking, what their real questions are, primarily in university settings. And the ecology, of course, ranks very high with students and young people. This is one of the best ways to reach young people, to reach their hearts, is by engaging with such critical problems and things that they're aware of. Some older people deny, but they're keenly aware of. Engaging them in a meaningful way and showing them how this is real morality. Because in responding to problems of ecology, we're responding to all of humanity and opening our hearts toward all of humanity in a loving and caring way. And to build on that, but also to realize that the technological age, when people can start to control computer screens, play computer games with only their eye movements, when we now already have mechanical devices that can read our brainwaves and act accordingly, that we can, for example, a person who has multiple sclerosis and can't move their arms, has a a machine, robotic machine. They think about a drink of water, and they think about picking it up and moving it to their lips. The robot reaches over, picks up the water, brings it to that person's lips and gives them a drink. And all of this because the computer operates on your brainwaves. These are things that we can't ignore. We can't pretend they're going to go away. They even affect the way people interact with the liturgy and react to the divine liturgy. So we need to discuss these more and more. And although I'm now forbidden to discuss them at the conferences where I usually go, because, of course, I'm one of the few to represent the Orthodox Church who's quite conversant in quantum mechanics, particle physics, and neurobiology, as well as robotics. Consequently, I've always had some spiritual input into these. And I want to invite others to educate themselves a little about these things, and also look at the evolution of the human brain that's taking place around us, and the coming guided evolution through biological engineering, and even to a certain degree, engineering of the brain and the way we think. So I'd invite questions about this and any discourse or discussion about it that anybody would like to have. So thank you, and again, God bless you. Thank you for joining us here. And we look forward to hearing from you and having conversations with you.